Welcome, everyone, to Word on Wednesday Live. Here we are, the month of July, July the 1st. So, happy 4th of July coming up this weekend, I suppose. And we just trust and pray that things will go smoothly in our nation. Please be in prayer for our nation in particular about things that have been taking place. It's just very sad. If only we had some strong leadership in our nation of people of conviction, people of good moral strength and fortitude, that would be welcome. We could even say rectitude, right? Doing the right thing at the right time. How important that is. So here we are in our 10th week in the book of Revelation. If you remember last week, we reviewed the opening of the 6 seals from that 7-sealed scroll. This is the revelation of Jesus Christ, and only Christ has the authority, the right, and the power to open the 7 seals of the scroll, which unleash the judgment of God upon the earth during the 7-year tribulation time. That scroll, that document, recognizes the right of the Lord Jesus Christ to do with the earth as he chooses. He is the maker and the creator of all things, including the earth, and it belongs to him. He can do with it as however he chooses. And this document thus serves as a title deed to the earth. He's going to open those seals, and the judgment that comes forth from those seals is what's going to happen at his authority and in his timing. And he's focusing on the nation of Israel during this 7-year period. I can't emphasize that enough. The tribulation is a time when God begins to focus on Israel. And with this emphasis on Israel in mind, we're going to, this evening, look at 2 chapters in the Bible. Revelation 7, obviously, is next. And we are also going to take a look, though, at Daniel chapter 9, as I indicated in the announcement that I had leading up to this yesterday. Daniel chapter 9 has one of the most amazing prophecies ever given, and that I'm excited to bring this to you tonight. If you've never looked into the prophecy of the 70 weeks of Daniel, be prepared to be amazed. Let's get started. Revelation 7 is what I would call a parenthetical chapter, meaning it kind of belongs in parentheses. In chapter 6, we saw the opening of 6 of the 7 seals. The 7th seal of that document will not be opened until chapter 8. Chapter 7, therefore, is rather like a break in the order of events regarding these 7 seals and what's happening on the earth as the tribulation gets underway. But chapter 7 is by no means an insignificant chapter. We're going to see strong evidence that the church age is clearly over. And we're going to see evidence that for the next 7 years, God is renewing his focus on his chosen people, Israel, his chosen nation of Israel, to get them to acknowledge that Jesus of Nazareth is indeed their Messiah. So, here is how Revelation chapter 7 begins. After these things, verse 1, after these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. As it continues here, pardon me, and this angel cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea. So they're responsible for judgment upon the earth, see. But this angel says to them, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. If you'll recall, Chapter 6 ended with all manner of these natural disasters falling upon the earth as that sixth seal was opened. The sun was darkened. The moon turned blood red. There was a great earthquake. Stars fell from the heavens. And now as chapter 7 begins, there's a break. There's a brief reprieve in the judgment as 4 angels are told to hold back on the 4 winds of the earth. There's a calmness falling. There's a brief interlude as God prepares messengers to spread his word during the 7 years. Notice that these servants must be sealed in their foreheads with the seal of the living God. Who exactly are these servants? Let's take a look at that. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. So we're talking about the tribes from the Old Testament of the nation of Israel. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. And of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. And it continues. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. And of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. And of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. Revelation chapter 7 informs us there's going to be a body of saints in the tribulation. Okay, the church is gone, but there will be believers, sanctified people who are believing in Christ during the time of the tribulation. There will be people who believe. And these 144,000, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, will be sealed, protected in the name of Christ. There will be people who get saved and believe in Christ during the tribulation time. Now, the Apostle John's attention returns to a scene in heaven with another large group of people. After the verses 9 and 10, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. This is a scene in heaven. They're clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." These are martyred saints. Notice they're from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. These are Gentiles, all right? The saints of the church age and the rest of heaven now join in on the worship of God on the throne. Verses 11 and 12. All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the 4 living creatures, remember these groups of people, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Now count these characterizations of worship here: blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. 7 different qualities, of worship being brought to God here. Again, the number 7 factors in to what's going on in the book of Revelation. It's throughout the book. I'll try to point it out whenever I can, whenever I notice it, and there's things I'm going to miss. There's so many aspects of that in this book. Now we're going to see who these robed saints are for certain, these ones who began this time of praise. It says here, then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? So it's kind of a quiz question coming from one of the elders, whom, as I've said, I believe them to be representing the church, having been raptured out from at the end of the church age, and they're now in heaven. And that's what I think the elders represent. And anyway, John says to him, "Sir, you know." So he said to me, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So this tells us, we now know there will be people saved during the tribulation. These people represent that. This is what has happened to this great crowd. They came out of the great tribulation, which may mean the intensive persecution during the final 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation. 7 years of tribulation, and the latter half of that, great tribulation. And that phrasing comes from Matthew chapter 24, the words of Jesus, who says that there will be great tribulation at that point, such as never been known nor ever will be known on the earth. And so that's what's happening, and we believe that will be the final 3.5 years of the tribulation, would be called the Great Tribulation. An intensity picks up, energy increases, and they too were cleansed. These ones who came through this time of persecution, they were saved by the blood of the Lamb who was slain. Jesus Christ fought, no matter where we're at in God's economy, Jesus Christ is the only way to the Father. That does not change, regardless of what time frame we're in. Please note as well, get back here to that, these people are martyrs. They've come through a time of tribulation and trouble. I believe that I'm right in saying that it is much easier, friend, for you to come to Christ now than it ever would be during a time of this tribulation. Someone might say, well, I'll just wait. I'll see if this rapture thing actually pans out, if it really looks like things are going the way the Christians are saying that it will. If it does that, well, then I'll know that all of it is true, because I'll see it for myself, and so I'll get saved then. I mean, I can imagine people thinking that sort of thing. But hey, think about this. You might die before the rapture happens. In fact, we all might before the rapture happens. We don't know when it's going to take place. Or suppose it does happen and you're here left behind, thinking, okay, the rapture happened. Now, hey, you stand a likely chance of dying in the judgments as the tribulation gets underway. One of the verses we looked at in last week, I believe it was, or 2 weeks ago, said that 1/4 of, well, actually it was last week, 1/4 of the earth's population stands to lose their lives in that initial 4 horsemen outpouring of judgment. 1/4. These are better numbers than you're going to ever get on any COVID count, okay? They're accurate. God is carrying out judgment. He knows what he's going to do. Your chances aren't good, friend. Here's the thing. If you're not prepared to commit to Christ now, here and now, if you're not prepared to commit to him now, you won't be able to make that commitment then either. The elder instructing the Apostle John continues to talk about these tribulation martyrs now in heaven. Let's take a look at the passage. Verses 15 through 17, the end of the chapter actually. Therefore, these saints, let me read it first. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. These believers who are in heaven out of the tribulation. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more, nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. One of the beautiful passages found in this amazing book. These saints seem to have the special privilege of serving God in his heavenly temple. We see there will be a temple of worship in heaven, and God will be in their midst. Notice the heat of the day is not going to weary them in toil and labor any longer. And as in Psalm 23, the Lamb will shepherd his people to fountains of living water, and every tear of suffering will be gone. It's just an amazing thing to think about in and of itself, that suffering as we know it, it'd probably shock my system to be removed from suffering. God himself is wiping away those tears. Awesome. Awesome thing to look forward to. Well, that completes our review of Revelation chapter 7. God has resumed his focus here on the nation of Israel for the 7 years of the tribulation. That the sealing of those 12,000 for each tribe of Israel ought to tell us that, if nothing else. Those Jewish witnesses, 144,000 of them, will begin to tell others that Jesus, who came from Nazareth, he was and he is indeed the Jewish Messiah, the anointed one prophesied, and that he is soon returning to earth to establish his kingdom in Jerusalem. So, in line then with this emphasis on Israel in the book of Revelation, I want to review with you one of the most fascinating Bible prophecies in the entire Bible. It deals with the first and second advents, both of them. The first time Jesus came, and also looking forward to his second advent, his second coming of the Messiah of Israel. We'll find this in Daniel chapter 9. Daniel and Revelation tend to dovetail very beautifully. We may consult another passage in Daniel as we move along here. I'm not sure. It all depends on how much time we have. But I'm sure we will be referencing Daniel again as we go through the study of the book of Revelation. Before we get to Daniel chapter 9, I want us to take a quick look at something from Matthew chapters 23 and 24, right where you cross the border there between those two chapters. Okay? Listen to these words that Jesus spoke to the Jewish leadership at the very end of Matthew 23. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her." Take note, friends, of the Jewish emphasis here, the emphasis again on Israel, on Jerusalem, obviously. And this is their Messiah. He says, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, or behold, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more, till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now you have to understand something here. Jesus came to Israel in his first advent. The first time he came to offer Israel the Messianic kingdom that had been prophesied in the Old Testament. Every Jew knew all about the Messianic kingdom. It's what they longed for. They longed for this almost more, if not more, than for the deliverance that the children of Israel wanted from Egypt, longing for God to deliver them, and leading, of course, to Moses and the great Exodus there. They want this Messiah to come. They're tired of Gentile rulership over them. The Greeks, the Romans. Before the Greeks, there were the Medes and the Persians who reigned over Israel's land. And before that, it was Babylon. 400, almost 500 years under those nations. And other things happened before that. The Assyrians, the Egyptians, as we've already said, had control over Israel at different times. And so they're looking for this prophesied Messiah. And when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, fulfilling the prophecy found in Zechariah chapter 9. Jesus was making that very offer. But they had rejected their Messiah at that point. It's fascinating to me. All four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all four of them carry this account of Jesus' triumphal entry, riding this donkey into Jerusalem. With all four of them recording the event, we know that this was a highly significant moment in Jesus' earthly ministry. We may not think of it that way, but they certainly did. The Jews certainly did, and the ones who were there on that day, they understood what was going on. But Jerusalem, in its leadership, effectively rejected his offer of the kingdom. It seems foolish to us, but this is what they did. And thus we have this lament that we just looked at in Matthew 23. Jesus laments their rejection of him, stating that Jerusalem and thus all of Israel would never see him again until they believed on him as their Messiah, which is what we've been saying will be the message of those 144,000 Jews. Now, these verses here that we just looked at, they're the final verses of Matthew chapter 23. Matthew 24, verse 1, the very next verse in the Bible, right, says this: Then Jesus went out, and he departed from the temple. Let me just stop there for a minute. Ezekiel chapter 10 talks about the departure of the glory of the Lord from the temple in the Old Testament time, right before the Babylonian captivity was taking place. He left the temple, and then the pagans came, the Gentiles came, and thus began Gentile domination. That was the character of the age. It began there. And the glory of the Lord went out. Here Jesus leaves, he departs from the temple. This is, we would read right past this verse if we were reading it through the Bible or something. But I want you to focus on that and remember it next time you see it, that he left the temple. The glory of the Lord himself left the temple. And his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. See, they want him to see the glory of the temple itself. It's fascinating. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Well, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now here, what we have just heard is Jesus prophesying that the temple is going to be destroyed. Not one stone shall be left upon another until it's all taken down. The glory of the temple will be gone shortly. And that is exactly what happened when the Romans took the temple and the city of Jerusalem, sacked it and conquered it in 70 A.D. The implication is that God directed the temple to be destroyed because Israel had rejected her Messiah. And here also the disciples come to Jesus once they're securely seated on the Mount of Olives opposite the Temple Mount. And they ask him, So when is all of this going to be, meaning the destruction of the temple? And when will be the sign for you to come in your kingdom? And when will the end of the age happen? Now, I want you to understand, we normally hear this verse and we think they're asking about, when's your second coming going to be? Well, they're not asking about Jesus' second coming, okay? That's not what they're talking about when they say the word coming here. He hasn't even left from his first coming yet, okay? As far as they're concerned, he's there to stay. So they don't see this. They wouldn't be asking about his second coming. No, they want to know when Jesus is coming into his kingdom. They want to know when Jesus is coming into the city of Jerusalem to take the throne of David, which was promised to Mary, that her son would indeed sit on the throne of David forever, and his kingdom would never end. When are you going to do this, Jesus? When are you going to set up your kingdom? When are you going to put an end to the age of the Gentile rule and establish the throne of David? Because that is what the Messiah is supposed to do. And then Jesus in this chapter 24 begins to give them signs of his coming into his kingdom. This chapter is about the signs of things that are going to happen before he establishes his millennial kingdom. Okay? Important to keep that in mind when you read here these prophecies. People will find things in there and they'll say, look, that's happening today. All this is coming to pass. No, it's not yet. All right? These things happen as he gets ready to come back during this tribulation time. Matthew 24 focuses on the tribulation just as Revelation does, and that's why we talk about it right now. All this is focused on Israel. It's all focused on the Jews. When you read about the elect people in Matthew 24, you're reading about the Jews there, not the church. All right? You have to keep the context of these things in mind. Jesus just left the temple, rejected by the Jews. He's prophesied the destruction of the Jewish temple. He's talking to Jewish men on that hillside who are asking about when is he coming in his kingdom, restoring the kingdom of David to Israel. He's talking about Israel here. All right, and that's what these things apply to. Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 and 16, he says this, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountain." Okay, we immediately learn here. Daniel spoke about something that Jesus calls the abomination of desolation. And it's going to stand. This abomination, this abominable act, person, thing, is going to stand, Jesus says, in the holy place. That means the temple. All right? And then Matthew adds this little comment in there in parentheses. Hey, if you're reading this, understand what Jesus is saying here. Okay? Understand what he's saying, which implies that we can. So that's important. All right. When this abomination of desolation happens, Jesus says, get out of Judea. Get out of Jerusalem as fast as you can. Don't look back for anything. Don't go back for anything. Woe to the women who have children or who are pregnant in those days, because they're going to be slowed down trying to get away of what's happening from what's happening as this great tribulation begins to unfold. Your very life is going to be at stake. Don't waste time. Get out. Let's look then at Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27 with these things still in mind. Daniel 9:27 says this, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering." Okay? "And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate." Okay, there it is. One is going to show up, some person talked about here, is going to show up on the scene, and that person is going to make things desolate as a result of bringing to pass abominations. The abomination of desolation. Now, who is this person? And what does all this mean when it comes to the Messiah setting up his kingdom in Jerusalem? I think we better take some time and look at this prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. It's pretty astounding, I can assure you. Daniel 9, the chapter itself, opens up with a marvelous prayer. Daniel is there asking for forgiveness for his people, Israel. Understand, it was their sin. Well, I guess we should back up and say Daniel is in Babylon. He's an old man now. He's been there pretty much all his life. From a young man on, probably in his teens, he came into captivity and was brought into Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, into his throne room, right? Into his ruling place, his castle, his domain. and to serve in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. And so he's knowing that he knows from Jeremiah that 70 years are going to pass by, and then they're going to return. And the time has come. It's really close. And so Daniel's asking for forgiveness for the sin of the people. What sin is that? They left Jehovah 70 years prior to this, and even before that, in a process of seeking after other gods. And that brought about all the destruction of Solomon's temple at the time by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar. A lot of destroying of temples and desecrating of temples going on here in Jerusalem. It also led to the southern kingdom of Judah being taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, which is how Daniel and his friends end up spending most of their life in Babylon. Now, while Daniel is yet praying, okay, God sends the angel Gabriel to bring him an answer to his prayer. And the answer comes in the form of this very interesting prophecy, a prophecy that I want to unpack for you tonight, heading in a certain direction with it. We're going to find that it has a lot to say about God's plan for the ages, including the abomination that causes desolation as referenced by Jesus. Let me read for you what Gabriel tells Daniel in verses 24 to 27. So obviously he's going to include verse 27, which I already read to you, but it's good to have the whole package, the whole passage as a package present for us to look at together. Here's what Gabriel says. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression. All right, take note, the people there, your people, Daniel, your holy city, Daniel, that's the Jews and Jerusalem, okay? Daniel's people, Daniel's holy city. It's Jewish. This whole thing is Jewish. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Okay, that's the temple. That's temple worship there. And notice, too, the Messiah has been cut off. Verse 26, I meant to mention that. Let me just back up there just real quick. It says there, after 62 weeks, verse 26, after 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off. The Messiah will be killed. All right? That's a prophecy of the crucifixion of Christ, or at least his death. It doesn't say crucifixion there, but he'll be cut off. But not for himself. Not for himself. He died for us. Let's move along here. He'll confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Now, Daniel had prayed to confess Israel's sins, and so God begins to show Daniel how he plans to take on the problem of sin, to remove it completely, to bring in a period of everlasting righteousness, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, okay, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy, okay. A certain amount of time, all right, is allotted here in this prophecy by God in order to take care of these things. All right? Let's take a look at this. 70 weeks. In Gabriel's message, we read that 70 weeks were set aside to accomplish God's plan. 70 weeks, are set about to determined to for your people and for your holy city. Now, most Bible scholars interpret this week, a week, in Daniel chapter 9 to be a period of time that is 7 years in length as opposed to 7 days. The word translated as week actually is the Hebrew word for 7. So it's kind of like 77s. And so it's not just fixed in the week. That comes from the King James translation. But it's not 7 days in a week. It's 7 years in a week here. 70 periods of 7 years per period would therefore equal a total of 490 years. Now, all of this might start to get a little complicated at this point, but we're going to take our time with it. We're going to go through this passage step by step. There's going to be some math involved, but I'm going to do all the math and just show my work, okay? So you're going to be okay. Just follow along as best you can. Let's begin by focusing. Don't worry, it's not going to be that bad. It's just a matter of looking at some crunching of numbers, which will all be displayed for you here. Let's begin by focusing on verse 25, okay? Verse 25 says, "Know, therefore, and understand, that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times." The first thing I notice is that Daniel is told to know. He's told to understand what Gabriel is about to tell him. This means that many aspects of this 490-year-long period are comprehensible. It's not really that mysterious. Gabriel says that from the going forth of the command to restore and to build Jerusalem, from there until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. We can see right away there's a starting point being described here. Okay? There's a starting point being described. 62 weeks. Let me see something once. Is that coming up next here? Yeah. Just want to make sure I'm on the right page here. Yeah. I got it emphasized there for you. Okay? There's a starting point to begin to mark off the time of this 70 weeks. All right? That starting point is going to be from the issuing of the command to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. That's what it says. All right? The command to restore and to build Jerusalem. Starting then. Note from the verse, this rebuilding also includes the streets and the wall. Okay? So we're talking about rebuilding the city proper, not the temple. All right? That's a separate issue in the Old Testament. But this is just rebuilding the city. So that's important to comprehend. And please notice the end point is at the advent, the coming of the Messiah, the Prince, the one who's going to reign on the throne. All right? Please note, friends, there's no escaping this. This is a Jewish prophecy. Daniel has been praying for his people Israel, and this prophecy is the answer to his prayer for his people Israel. Israel and the church are not the same thing, all right? They're separate, all right? And it's important to keep that separation in mind. Daniel knows nothing about a church. He's focused on his people. Verse 24 begins, 70 weeks are determined for your people, Daniel. This prophecy pertains to the coming of the Messiah, and we can see it here in this verse 25. Let's see here. Let's take a look at this next slide. Let's look at the length of time period, that will begin when that decree to rebuild Jerusalem is issued, okay? The length of time is described here as 7 weeks and 62 weeks, okay? So there's 2 periods of time, okay? 77 weeks, rather, and 62 weeks. 7 weeks, 7 years per week, would be 49 years. And then the 62-week period would be 434 years. And then 49 plus 434 equals 483 years altogether. That's 7 shy of 490. So what does all this mean? Well, if we knew the date that the decree was issued to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem, if we knew that, well, then we could add 483 years to that time and arrive at the time when the Messiah, the Prince, comes. See, that's what verse 25 is telling us. From the time of the issue of the command to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince. 7 weeks and 62 weeks, okay? So if we knew the date that decree was issued, we could then figure out when the Jewish Messiah was to come. And in fact, we do indeed have the exact date that this specific decree was issued. You see, there was a Persian king by the name of Artaxerxes Longimanus. Now that's going to be on the test. Write that down. Artaxerxes Longimanus. There's no test. Don't worry. And he issues this decree for Nehemiah to go back and to restore and to begin to rebuild Jerusalem. Let's take a look at Nehemiah's story here from chapter 2 of Nehemiah, verses 1 through 6. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, since you're not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart." And so I became dreadfully afraid, and I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad? When the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste, and its gates have been burned with fire." Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" And so I prayed to the God of heaven. I like how Nehemiah says that. He doesn't, "I'll be right back, I got to go pray." He prays right there on the spot. And then he says to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." And then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Now the events described here take place after the time of Daniel, okay? Judah has been allowed to return to the land. And Nehemiah is overcome with emotion as he thinks about the condition of the city of Jerusalem, which had been sacked so long ago by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians when Daniel was taken prisoner. And as cupbearer to the king, Nehemiah is in a position to petition Artaxerxes to rebuild Jerusalem. And the king grants his request, thus issuing a decree to rebuild the city. So, when exactly did this happen? That's what we're after right now. We're after that starting date for that command. Well, verse 1 actually tells us. Take a look at this. "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes." In one of those sentences that is often overlooked when we read the Bible, just like, Jesus went out from the temple and departed, right? It says here, "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes." So it's the 20th year of Artaxerxes' reign, and it's the Jewish month of Nisan. And that's when this decree was issued. Now, I know that doesn't seem to have a great deal of meaning to you yet. But let's look at some things here. The first day, at that time and in that culture, all official decrees given during a given month were retroactive back to the first day of the month. It just goes back to the first. It's easy for record keeping and all that. It goes back to the first day. It won't be like we would do. Starting on the first of next month or whatever, it goes back. So, hence the official issuing date for this decree even though it may have come later in the month, was the first of Nisan in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. Okay? And it is known from other sources exactly what year Artaxerxes came to power. Consequently, hang on a second. Yeah. The decree to rebuild Jerusalem was issued on March the 14th, 445 BC. So when recalibrated to our calendar, we learn that the decree of the first of Nisan in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, and there's ways they can date to when that 20th year took place, and the first of Nisan is known. It comes down to March the 14th, 445 BC on our calendars. That's when the decree was issued. So now we have a date that we can kind of relate to. So the countdown for the 70 weeks of Daniel, or the 490 years in Daniel chapter 9, began on March the 14th, 445 BC. Now with that in mind, let's look at that first sentence in Daniel 9:25 once again. From the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah of the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 62 weeks. Once again, notice this time frame begins at Artaxerxes' decree and ends at the coming of the Anointed One, Messiah, the Christ. But notice something else here. There are 2 subdivisions to this. 2 subdivisions of time, 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And we looked at it before earlier, but the 2 subdivisions added together, they equal a period of 69 weeks. Now 70 weeks are determined, but here we see the number 69. 69 times 7 equals 483 years. So as we saw earlier, it would be 483 years from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah comes. All right, so not 490. This is an amazing prophecy. I hope you're not getting lost in the numbers that I'm throwing around and the conversions to different years and dates and everything. Look at the specificity of this prophecy. It's amazing. Gabriel told Daniel, there's going to be a decree, Daniel, issued to restore and rebuild the city of Jerusalem, which, as you know, Daniel, was destroyed when you were taken captive. In Nehemiah's day, that decree was officially handed down on March the 14th, 445 BC. And that part of the prophecy was fulfilled. But that's just the beginning. For from that date, Gabriel told Daniel it would be 483 years until the Messiah comes. All right, now look at this. If it was 445 BC, and I've got a negative 445 up there, if it was 445 BC when that happened, you don't have to be a really good mathematician to realize that 483 years later gets you to 38 AD. That is really close to the time of Jesus when he was on earth. This is pretty astounding. This book goes way back. It's astounding how close this prophecy comes to the time of Jesus. But hey, folks, it gets even closer than you think. Remember, I said to always keep this Jewish setting for prophecy in mind. We have to do that to be good Bible students. So let me guide you through this next part just by asking some simple questions. How many days are there in a year? All right, how many days in a year? Well, 365, right? Pretty much everybody is aware of that. Now, in a more accurate representation of that would be 365 and 1/4 days. And that's why every 4 years we have a leap year to make up that extra day. In fact, this year happens to be one. We had February the 29th this year. None of us remember that because we were stuck in our homes, but that's beside the point. That's how long it takes the Earth to make one trip around the sun. All right, 365 and 1/4 days. Our calendar is based on the Earth relative to the sun. We have in our Western culture what we would call a solar calendar. All right, but the Jewish calendar used in the Bible is different. In fact, the Middle Eastern calendar generally of that time in ancient times was different. How many days are there in a Jewish year? How many days in a Jewish year? It's 360 days in a Jewish year. So which calendar do you think Daniel was using, folks? Well, it was the Jewish calendar, right? So a year to Daniel, and in fact to the rest of the Middle East at that time, a year was 360 days long. They would add a month every so often to their calendar and have a 13-month year to make up the difference, so that the farming season and the growing season and planting season, all that would not fall out of sync of the seasons of nature. Okay? So our 483-year period is going to be different than what we would normally think. We have to think of it in terms of 360 days in a year. So now we're going to need to do some more math, okay? 483 Jewish years times 360 days per year equals the incredible amount 173,880 days. Now, for the record, those are 24-hour days just like we have. Now, there are leap years. We've talked about that briefly, and those have to be figured in with this. Leap years as we understand them now I'm talking about. But we're not going to get into that much detail tonight. I have gone through that before, and believe me, it works out. However, when you go through all those calculations, and then you recalibrate all of it back to our calendar so we can understand what's going on, here is what happens. Starting at March the 14th, 445 BC, and counting off 173,880 days, you arrive at April the 6th, 32 AD. And that incorporates all the leap year and the days you have to put in there for that. And that happens to have been, April the 6th, 32 AD, happened to have been a Sunday. And April the 6th, 32 AD is right at the time when Jesus was on the earth. I'm telling you, this prophecy in Daniel 9 is truly remarkable in its accuracy, and it shows you the power of the Bible, the Word of God, and that you can trust it because it's so accurate in things. So here's a recap of all this. Let me back up on that, sorry. Here's a recap. Daniel's been told by the angel that a decree would be issued to rebuild Jerusalem, and then he's told that essentially 173,880 days later, Messiah would be on the scene. So from March 14th, 445 BC, adding those days, the date is Sunday, April the 6th, 32 AD, the time of Jesus. But it gets even better. Exactly what was Jesus doing on that Sunday, April the 6th, 32 AD? Well, as you can probably guess, we can figure that out. Recall that the prophecy in Daniel is specific to the city of Jerusalem and the people of Israel. That's what Daniel had been praying about. He was told that the decree to be issued would begin rebuilding of Jerusalem, and Nehemiah was sent in to begin that. And from that decree, it could then be measured off in time to exactly when the Anointed One, the Messiah, was going to come. Based upon the context, then, it's not far-fetched to assume that this day would be when the Messiah himself actually enters Jerusalem. Daniel prays for Jerusalem. The decree is for the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and the Messiah comes into Jerusalem. That sort of forms a pattern, a package, right? It follows a pattern within the Jewish context here. Once again, we can get some good dates from one of those sentences in the Bible that we rarely pay much attention to. Let's take a look at Luke chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Now, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip tetrarch of Ituraea and the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanias tetrarch of Abilene, and that's not in Texas, okay, while Annas and Caiaphas were high priests, the word of God came to John, the son of Zacharias, in the wilderness. Luke is such a cool writer. Cool hand Luke, okay? I don't know. He is so accurate with his history. Look at all the names that he lists here, and the times. It's not like anybody could say, well, I guess we really have no idea when John the Baptist began his ministry. And Luke's like, what do you mean we don't have any idea? I told you. It was in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Do you remember? Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, and Herod was tetrarch of Galilee. And his brother Philip was tetrarch in Etruria and Trachonitis, and Lysanias was tetrarch of Abilene, not in Texas. Luke knew his stuff about history, folks. In fact, Luke ought to be ranked among the top ancient historians. He was concerned about dates and so forth. He's that good. And he talks here about the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. And the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar began on August the 19th, 28 A.D. Now, Luke says later in chapter 3 here, now Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age. So Jesus' ministry probably began in the fall of 28 A.D., shortly after his baptism by John. And that's what Luke was tracking at the beginning of chapter 3. It's well established that there were 4 Passovers during the course of Jesus' public ministry. So we can mark those off. Now, Jesus himself began his ministry to about age 30, okay? And we said that's the fall of 28, right? 4 Passovers. Passover occurs in the spring of the year, usually right close to our Easter celebration. So the first Passover of Jesus' public ministry after he begins in 28 A.D. would have been the spring of 29 A.D. And the 4th Passover, the final Passover, the Passover when Jesus became the Passover lamb for the world, would have been in 32 A.D. In the Jewish calendar, Passover falls on the 14th day of the month of Nisan. Is it hard to wonder at all why Nehemiah was so emotional and upset about the state of Jerusalem in that month of Nisan? In 32 A.D., the 14th of Nisan fell on Thursday, April the 10th. The Gospel of John tells us about Jesus' arrival to Jerusalem for that 4th and final Passover. John 11, verse 55 through 12:1. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Now Jesus had resurrected, or had raised from the dead, Lazarus in chapter 11, okay? And so then those folks who came up to do that, they sought Jesus, and they spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple. What do you think? That he will not come to the feasts? Now, both the chief priests and the Pharisees had been given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Oh boy, I'm not keeping you up with that, okay? Now, both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. And then, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. So Jesus arrives in Bethany on Friday, April the 4th. Thursday, the day of the Passover, the 14th, was actually on, was it Thursday? I forgot now already. That's pretty crazy. I got to go back and look now just to keep the things straight here. Let me see. Okay, Thursday was April the 10th. I knew the 14th wasn't right. It's the 14th of Nisan. That's when Passover is. But it's the 10th of April for us, okay? So 7 days back would be Thursday, April the 3rd. Friday would be April the 4th, 32 AD, 6 days before the Passover. Maybe I better quit some of this. Anyway, 6 days before the Passover, and 2 days later would be Sunday, April the 6th. And on that day, Jesus would fulfill another prophecy. Zechariah 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you." He's coming on that day, and riding upon a donkey, upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay, the exact date prophesied in Daniel 9:25, April the 6th, Sunday, 32 A.D. That very day is Palm Sunday. That's the very day that the Messiah enters into Jerusalem. Remember, we talked about this, They did not recognize the time. Okay? They didn't recognize the time. They, the Jews, did not see the time of the Lord's coming. They should have recognized it. Why? Because it was told to them. There were prophecies talking to them about this. They had the time of Daniel. Okay? Daniel had given the most remarkable revelation that 173,880 days from March the 14th, 445 BC, on Sunday, April 6, 32 AD, on the exact same day prophesied, the Messiah would come into Jerusalem. And indeed, he did do that. Daniel's prophecy was fulfilled to the very day. This is amazing. Christian friend, if this doesn't blow you out of the water, you better have somebody check to see if you're breathing, okay? Because this is astounding stuff. Now, it's not so astounding necessarily that the mighty and powerful God who created time should be such a master of time that he could tell us when any of his prophecies might be fulfilled, but that he did tell us that he said things, and that he said things such as, whoever reads this, let him understand, and he said things like, know and understand what I'm about to tell you. It indicates how much he has desired to vindicate his word to us. This is for us to know. This prophecy in Daniel not only humbles me so completely, it also tells me that I can trust the Bible, no matter what, to be telling me the truth about all things. Okay, 69 of the 70 weeks of Daniel have come and they've gone. 1 week, 1 7-long-year period of time remains. And that 70th week of Daniel is the 7-year tribulation, which we're exploring in the book of Revelation. As I've said several times this evening, God's focus returns to his people, Israel, during this time. And we're going to pick up the study in chapter 8. We're going to see the opening of that 7th seal and the beginning of 7 trumpets taking place there. If time permits, we may also get into chapter 9 of Revelation, perhaps completing both chapters next week. I'll have to see. But at any rate, I hope you really appreciate what we've just looked at here this evening, seeing this prophecy fulfilled in such a magnificent way, down to the very day. When you study Jesus' activities on that day, preparing to go into there, he sends his disciples ahead to get the colt. And he says, such and such a man will meet you at such and such a place. It'll all be ready. I mean, he's talking about the specificity of the fulfillment of this prophecy that he, of course, made known to Daniel, some 500 years before. It's incredible to think about all the things that God is doing, and that he's telling us time and time again, I have you covered. I know your days. I know what you're going through. I know what you're enduring. Trust me. Trust my word. You can. It is truth. It really bothers me when I see things like this in the Bible, and I see people who seem to take the Bible so lightly. Christian people, Christian leaders today, who take the Bible so lightly and say, no, it's got some really good stuff in it, no doubt about it. I think God does speak to us through that, but there's some things I don't know about, and blah blah blah, and on it goes. It really bothers me because I see things like this, and I wonder if they would even ever pay attention to that. But it ought to give us peace also in this time that we're in now, that God is at work, friends. He's here. He's working in our midst. He knows what you're going through, and he loves you deeply, and he desires for you to know the truth that he has in his word, because knowing that truth means knowing him. It means knowing all about him and what he has set out to do. It's such an exciting thing to be a biblical, believing Christian. I don't know why anybody would want to be anything else once they come to know Christ. So, anyway, have a good night. Have a good week. Be sure to join us on Sunday, okay? 10 o'clock in the morning at our services, our service there on that morning. Come join in on a patriotic Sunday with us this Sunday. Should be a grand time. Okay, God bless you, and take care, everyone.